돈주 와당 장시 담초 숑 데네 머넘 도페 양지르 네 체호름 조르왕 rimji zhevr jir lariang hoksam xianglin donjong shte mzhev zazhang loma kus gyun panzan tongdang ragnab devam jong de teni pomo wangbo zhurto jang panzan tawa ragbin do chigti xiang jad lendot xiang japa lendomjong zhonxiang nab teni cedang sonam zhewa yi zhangzi ronja sayi pchiza yang 판선 곧배 첨부도 처음종 곧님흑뜸 원거 만밤종 심튼 내기 니르다르카르종와 님슨 라소 디츠기 요브르 게르데네 럼전 사이 작당의 니기 차르당 팝마 메임즈숑 르브제 디 샹츠 람당의 포모 왕보 럭브르 도키르베 쳇장 왕보 조르건 도치숑 ngoci 왕건 적침 숑와르데 데다가 양치다 까르와 조던 노
Let us continue with the wish-fulfilling treasury. One can say that the wish-fulfilling treasury is the encyclopedia of Buddhism. Within this text, it covers three aspects: the listening, the contemplation, and the practicing of Buddhism. We're currently in the sector on listening, which includes a comprehensive knowledge system of the animated world and the inanimated world. In the animate world, we have already covered on the formless realm and form realm. Currently, we're studying the desire realm. Within desire realm, there are two again, the three higher realms and three lower realms. We also studied the heavenly beings and the human beings. Currently, we're studying the human beings, especially on the parts of the human beings of Jambudvipa. Over here, I would like to make a correction. Yesterday, I may have made a mistake by saying that Yadro Yutso was the ocean without heated afflictions, but it was really a slip of tongue. It was Mapong Yungso. Yadro Yutso was the lake that you would see on the way to Nepal. But Mapong Yutso is similar, is currently considered the ocean without heated afflictions, even including lots of the dictionaries, the Tibetan dictionaries. The explanation of Mapong Yutso is the ocean without heated afflictions. Whenever we talk about ocean without heated afflictions in Tibet, nobody would know what that is, or very rarely people would know. But if you were to say Mapong Yutso, then people would know. It is a sacred lake. Do you remember yesterday in the video we saw that there's a description of the sun lake and then the moon lake, the sacred lake and the demon's lake. So it is the sacred lake over there. People may wonder why the shape that's described is different than the shape that we see. But we need to remember the description was made about 2,500 years ago, and at that time the geology and geography are indeed quite different than what it is now, what we see now. Also, what could manifest in front of us is a small lake, but indeed it is a Naga's palace. Since the Naga kings could live in great oceans and could live in small ponds and lakes, even the Naga's spring that we have over here in Larongar, there is a great Naga king resides over there. Don't even mention about the great lake such as Mapong Yutso. There's the Tsokacha, the Kacha lake. There are lots of stories about the Naga king. Also, whenever whenever there's the sacred lake or when there's the natural spring and the very sweet spring or sacred spring, we usually would know that that's the residence of Nagas, the Naga kings. The Mapanyumto, the lake, is a pilgrimage site for many. Every year, thousands and tens of thousands of people would pay the pilgrimage visit to the Mapanyumto lake. Yesterday we talked about Gaon Rinpoche, and after we talked about how supreme Gaon Rinpoche is, I believe many of you want to circumambulate the mountain, but it's probably not that easy. First of all, it is quite strict to visit there. The policies, it is quite strict to pay a visit. On top of that, the weather is not that great. In the Tibetan saying, we say that when one were to hear about something, then one would make a beautiful image out of it. But if one were to actually visit that place, then one would not be able to see anything beautiful about it. In the past, I remember that when we first were about to go to India, the group of us felt, it would be really wonderful and it would be so great to be in India. But after we arrived there, we felt hungry and it was really hot. So maybe you hear all the wonderful news about certain place, but whenever you go there and visit there, it would not be that comfortable for you anymore. There's nothing so comfortable about that place. Anyhow, it is not very easy to travel anywhere right now. It's not convenient during the pandemic. So the best thing to do is, instead of traveling for thousands of miles, it would be better for you to sit through thousands of meditation cushions. Yesterday, we watched this short video on the description of Gaon Rinpoche, the Gandis mountain. It indeed is quite a wondrous mountain, isn't it? Through the short video, it introduced that the height of it is 66 meters of height, and the distance between the mountain to various of important landmarks are about 6,666 miles or kilometers, or maybe double of that, or so on and so forth. So there are lots of quite miraculous coincidences that displayed on the Gaon Rinpoche. Also, yesterday we talked about the four great rivers, the four mother rivers, you can call it. And some said that the four lakes can be called the mother lakes, since out of the four lakes, there manifested the four great rivers. In terms of the lakes and the rivers, some of the sutras or records says that the rivers located at the peak of Gandis, some said at the foot of the Gandis mountain. Some said that the rivers just came out from the lake. However, the four lakes, if you remember, the lake of the herds of elephant, herds of horses, herds of lions and peacocks, the four different lakes came out from the different directions, and some of them came out of the different springs of the different directions. So the description over here in words are a bit different than what you see in person. I know someone who's a journalist and also an authority who works over there for a long period of time, and he studies specifically in that area. He particularly went there, and he said that the rivers are a bit, the rivers, in fact, has a bit of distance to the sacred lake. However, it is still part of that mountain range. So something that we read from words could be a bit different than when we go there and take a look over there and then what we see. Yesterday we talked about how the Horsemouth River or the Herds of Horse River is the Yarluzampo River. So it's quite miraculous in some ways, especially I think to the world. I remember there was a movie that shows the end of the world, and at the very end of it, at the very end of the movie, it seems that the whole world is completely sank, except that there was one monastic meditating in his monastic robe and sitting on the peak of the mountain, while the whole world simply disappeared in a vast ocean. And that mountain was the Ganges mountain. Recently, we've seen lots of news about flooding right now, including the Guangxi province, which is in the southern part of China. And sometimes we see the news about flood or fire or war. But compared to all of those calamities, our Larongar or in Tibet, everything is rather more peaceful. Maybe it has something to do with our geological location as well. Though that the descriptions in the traditional texts could be a bit different than what we see from maps. But those differences are not that great. If you're interested in this, I would encourage you to explore in it. Also, I really, truly think that Tibet is a very special place. I'm not selling this idea because I am a Tibetan. Rather, I think since you're studying over here on the Tibetan plateau, which is quite wondrous, we need to understand the value that it's brought about. We need to understand the wisdom and the culture and all the philosophy that it nurtured, which is pure and quite precious. On one hand, we can see such kind of purity from the natural sceneries. There are lots of sacred lakes, sacred springs, and mountains and trees even. There are lots of the sacredness in this land. From the historical point of view of human beings, we can say that the human beings degraded from the celestial realm and then became half gods and half human, and then continued to degrade and then became such coarse living sentient beings, which is also considered or recognized by lots of religions as well. We need to understand the sacredness within our environment, and we need to understand the connection that we have to this sacredness. Whatever kind of culture that we grow up in, this would influence our value system and our view of life, even your view or your aesthetics. So we shouldn't just think that whatever my teacher taught me in the past, they were absolutely correct. I'm not saying that they're wrong completely. I'm saying that there are lots of different teachers that grew up with their different value system, and we need to understand that there are different facets of understanding things. Now let's continue with the verse. The bank of the ocean, there is the Jambuvipa Jisha tree. The fruit would fall into the ocean and become gold. Such gold is similar to melding the metal for 16 times. The name comes from the adornment of the jambu tree. Over here it says that on the right side of the ocean without heated affliction, there is a tree that is called the Jambuvipa tree. And the tree is quite grand. It would enter all the way into the clouds. And after the fruit ripens from the tree, it will fall into the ocean without heated affliction. And then with the condition of the water, the fruit itself will become the Jambuvipa gold. Why Jambuvipa gold? In Tibetan, we call it Jawa Chinser, which is considered as extremely important and very special. It is much better, much more pure than the current purest gold that we have in this world. So some said this Jambuvipa gold comes from the fruit, the matured fruit from the Jambuvipa tree. Some of the fruit, after falling into the ocean without heated affliction, would be eaten by the Naga kings, and the Naga kings would transform themselves into fish and then would consume the fruit. And some of them, since they're not consumed by the Naga kings, they would transform into gold, and this is the Jambuvipa gold. According to the sutras, it describes the Jambuvipa fruit as such. Some of the bhikshus with miraculous powers, they would fly all the way to this tree, and then after seeing the fruit, at the time of taking the pit out of the fruit, their hand would dig into the fruit very deeply, and then the whole hand would be tinted into red, and it smells quite fragrant. For that reason, some of the bhikshus says that I am someone who has already departed from all kinds of greed. If I were not a practitioner who vowed to part from greed, I would definitely be intoxicated by the fruit. Many bhikshus with great miraculous powers would specifically come to the Jambuvipa tree and even come to the ocean without heated afflictions to manifest their miraculous powers. There are lots of stories about that. After the fruit falling into the lake, and then it would transform into gold. That gold is 16 times better than the gold that we see now. In fact, it carries such beautiful luster. Nowadays, we see all kinds of gold and gold colors, but those are rather very sharp and too saturated, but they don't look very beautiful or comfortable. The luster still has quite a bit of difference to the actual gold. The gold leaves that we have over here in our shrine hall, they're not the best, but they're of the middle grade. Also, on the north side of the bank of the ocean without heated affliction, there is the iron spike tree. On top of this tree, there lived 4 types of gold-winged birds. Usually it is said that in the lake there lived the Naga king, and on the trees there lived the Garudas, and there are different types of Garudas. So the previous verse, this verse specifically talks about why our continent is called the Jambuvipa. It is because this particular Jambuvipa tree adorns this continent. In our continent, the most important sacred mountain is the Gan Rinpoche, the Gandes mountain, and the most important lake is the lake without heated affliction, and then the tree is the Jambuvipa. So that's the name, where the name comes from for Jambuvipa, the continent. Now the next one, according to Mipa Rinpoche, he talks about how the sentient beings, the rest of the sentient beings, step by step started to manifest. Jambuvipa, being adorned by the Jambuvipa tree, lived over here at the beginning were the sentient beings who manifested over here, and their lifespan were infinite. Slowly and slowly, the lifespan decreased. along with the decline of their merits. Before the decline of the merit, majority of the human beings at that time came through emanation. And then through the history, we can see that from the beginning it was emanation, and then was birthed through eggs, and then the emanation, and then the birth from moist, and then the birth from womb, which is the most inferior. Many people would say that, well, how could birth from womb is the most inferior? We will be able to look at that. Now, since human beings at the beginning had lots of merits, so the human beings at that time enjoyed a great numbers of joy and enjoyments. But slowly and slowly, because of distraction, because of all kinds of laziness, and because of wasting their merit without accumulating more provisions and more merits, the decline of their merits resulted to the shorter period of lifespan. Also, at the beginning, the human beings were born from emanation, if you remember. And then later, with the four great elements, the earth, water, fire, and wind, also on top of that, the fifth element, which is light, all gathered together, and slowly, with the coarse formation, it became an egg. Usually we call eggs, or the birth through eggs, as two births, because first of all, an egg has to be formed inside the body of a hen or a bird, and then the egg will be born from the body of the bird. But the so-called egg is a bit different than the egg that we usually talk about. Rather, the egg is the result of the formation of the causes and conditions. The causes and conditions being the four great elements and the gathering of them. If you remember, also King Gisar was born from an egg, though that he has a father and a mother, but he was born from an egg. That was part of the history. The human beings at that time, since the elements, the proportion of the elements of each human being is different, the earth, water, fire, and wind would result in different types of human bodies. For example, some of them could be short and some could be tall. And the kind of human beings with the unbalanced four elements would be rather short and being ugly looking, but the ones with balanced four elements, they would look quite magnificent. And also back at that time, each of the human beings would carry light with them that would be as long as the 7 yujanas. In the previous birth of human beings, they had infinite light, but slowly with the decline, their lights would also shrink. On top of that, they would eat the essence of four elements as food, and they were completely naked. They don't need any clothing, and there is no suffering from heat or coldness. Nowadays, many Westerners also promotes the lifestyle of being natural. For example, in Canada, in the States, and some countries in Europe, hundreds of people or dozens of people would ride naked on their motorcycle or on their bicycles, and they would ride it on public streets. Through those photos and videos, it seems that people around them, they felt rather quite natural to be around those nudists. I also heard about nudist weddings and nudist beach. Also, nudist sports, since people believe that this body was given by God. It was a creation of God, therefore there's nothing to be ashamed about. Also, some young people would consider that's quite true, and it makes lots of sense. In the past, some of the animal protection associations, in order to advocate for protection of animals and avoid killing of the animals, they would advocate such idea while walking naked on streets as a way to propagate their idea. So the now nudist, in some ways, it's more close to what we say as without a principle or not knowing the limits. But people, human beings back then, they do not wear any clothing. Even when their body got tinted by some or got defiled by some dust, the natural ponds would be able to rinse them off, and the water is rather very soft and gentle at the time that the body touches those water. It will generate a sense of pleasure. People at that time naturally would practice the 10 virtuous deeds. That was due to the power of wind. People would naturally walk in space. That was the part of human history around that period of time. At the time of human lifespan is 6,100,000. The light would decrease one arrow's length. Also, there's birth of moisture. The wish-fulfilling ox as well as miraculous horses would manifest. Because of the karma of the sentient beings, so the collective karma, many of the functions would slowly decrease. At the time of human lifespan of 6 million. Did it say 6 million or 100,000? What does it say in the auto commentary? Maybe we'll look into it a little more. Anyhow, it says that since the human being's lifespan would lessen, also the light of the human beings at that time would be only about one arrow's length, which is about 1 meter. With the causes and conditions started to mature, the human beings would be able to born from heat and moisture, just like some of the bugs that we see, insects and fish. At that period of time, the birth out of moisture and heat started to manifest, and that is a human being born out of moisture and heat. In the previous one was through eggs, and now through moisture and heat. Also, around that period of time, naturally there manifested the wish-fulfilling ox and the miraculous horses. So the majority of human beings' life and the various aspects of functions were carried out by those animals. the herders and nomads of Tibet would enjoy yogurt and milk and have some tsampa, but because sometimes we would be out of tsampa. Sometimes we won't be able to get tsampa from the farmers from the different regions. Therefore, we would just have yogurt and have some ghee. Though that we also have yak or cows, but they're not the wish-fulfilling ox. That being said, we still have yogurt and milk. At that time, not only there's the wish-fulfilling ox, there's also the miraculous horses that would take you from different places to another places. So the human beings, by relying on some natural powers and natural forces, a person would be able to have the wish-fulfilling ox and horses and would enjoy all of those kinds of effortless life. The karma of human beings are indeed quite unbelievable. As monastic, I think it's a bit easier, but as worldly beings, it's very difficult to earn livings in the society. In the past, most of the people would have chariots or would have yaks and horses, but nowadays, if a person were to have some cars, or sometimes second-hand cars, they would have to work very hard. But in the past, we can think of those miraculous horses as cars. At the time of a person's birth back then, they would naturally be born with the wish-fulfilling cow and the miraculous horse. Also, some of the human beings would be born out of moisture and heat, just like some small insects that we see nowadays. But of course, there's still quite a bit of a difference between the human beings to the animals, because the merits are still there's still sufficient merit to support that kind of lifestyle. Wouldn't it be interesting for us to study how human beings came from? Over here, it definitely states very clearly. Therefore, if you like history, this is definitely a very good text to cross-reference. And the verse says that in the later part, human beings started to gather more greed and desire, which resulted in distraction. For that reason, the merit and lifespan decreased step by step. What was that 6 million? Did you look into it? The disciple says that it's from 6 million to 100,000. There is a progression, or rather retrogression of the lifespan. Khenpo says, are you sure? Are you guessing? Or do you know this through your miraculous powers or clairvoyance? Saya zhig bum呢？Saya zhig bum，对，Saya zhig Saya zhig是600万，bum 10万。那个地方住持有没有600万的？啊？大概这个地方。什么这个地方？不是大概这个地方。 The commentary didn't really specify. So it's possible from 6 million to 100,000 between that duration of lifespan. Maybe that's what it means. So you're right. You're very good at it. Excellent.
Wow.
Excellent.
In
this verse, it says that after human beings have the lifespan of 90,000 years, things started to change because the desire started to cause distractions. Because in the past, the human beings had the wish-fulfilling ox, and the lifestyle would be rather very easy. But since there's the growth of their desire and distraction, the human being's merits and the lifespan as well as wealth slowly decrease. Also, the wish-fulfilling tree started to appear. At that time, there were trees that would grow whatever kinds of fruits, and the human beings would be able to eat it and use it as food. And the human beings could use the leaves as their clothing. Though the human beings didn't have the male and female parts, but because of ignorance, the dormanted seeds, it is still at the stage of having seeds, the dormanted seeds. The five afflictions, the greed, anger, ignorance, are the apparent and processing afflictions, but at that time they were still dormanted afflictions. Out of greed, out of ignorance, at the time of sleeping, by simply gazing at each other or simply having that dormanted seeds, the male and female, while gazing and having certain contacts, a sense of enjoyment would spur. And then with those very subtle touches, nothing so coarse like a hug that we have nowadays, rather a very subtle touch. There would be the causes and conditions of having the womb birth. At that time, it was still during the period of the birth through moisture and heat. But after that, there began the very ancient lifestyle of human beings. So the birth through womb, and maybe some that's described by the Darwinian evolution theories. At that period of time, human beings don't have the provisions that we have nowadays. Rather, they would just eat some fruit and some vegetables. Also, the clothings are very similar to what some of the ancient tribes of Africa would wear. after that, the male and female parts start to manifest. They would gaze into each other and started to have touches through greed. The wish-fulfilling tree would be erupted and would disappear. After another 150 years, earlier, the human lifespan was 90,000 years, and maybe after 150 years, which is a little bit different than all the commentary of Long Chenpa, but it says that after 150 years, the female and male reproduction parts would slowly appear. There's only the vague shape that would appear, but there's not a true reproduction parts yet, rather just a vague shape. At that period of time, the male and female would gaze into each other, gaze at each other, which would be sufficient for them to have greed and started to initiate touches. And then they would gather at a place where they would have all kinds of entertainment. After another 150 years, human beings started to manifest the pleasure through touch. Also, all kinds of thoughts and conception, the conceptualization, also counting, especially when it comes to counting, has something to do with grasping. The thinking, the missing, the conceptualization, the calculation, and the remembering, all of those kinds of dualistic thoughts would manifest. In our afflictions, after having the reproduction parts, then the greed would naturally manifest as well. After greed, then arrogance, and then jealousy, all of those dormant seeds would start to manifest too. After having greed and anger, after those kinds of dormant seeds to start to mature, the fruits from the wish-fulfilling tree, especially about the fruits from the wish-fulfilling tree, they would argue over each other and wanted to hoard the wish-fulfilling tree for themselves. So out of such greed, they would calculate on their own benefits. I think majority of our afflictions spur from greed. Out of greed, we would generate aggression and jealousy and arrogance. We would grasp onto our disposition, our family, our talents. Therefore, in our Pratimoksha vow, we talk about how the root of all affliction is greed. For someone who wanted to generate a mind of renunciation, has to eradicate the most severe affliction, which is greed. At that time, the human beings, after the dormant seed started to spur, and then after the other dormant afflictions started to manifest, and maybe the human beings at that time wanted to hoard the wish-fulfilling tree for themselves, so they fight over each other, and maybe at the end they would cut down the wish-fulfilling tree. So after that, the human beings' merits would decline even further, and then the wish-fulfilling tree would no longer grow. When we look at all the resources that we have nowadays in our world, all the provisions, if the human beings do not grasp onto them. In fact, we have sufficient amount of food. When we look at Ukraine and Russia, after their war, since both of them being the great country of agriculture, both of the countries provide and export food and crops to other countries. Since both of them are in war nowadays, there's a food security issue in the world. Many countries stated that they do not want to export food anymore. At the beginning, maybe out of greed, maybe out of anger, maybe out of jealousy. At the beginning, it was the greed from Russia wanting to take Ukraine back in control, and then along with that, there's the anger, and then there's aggression, and then jealousy. When we look at this pattern, we would be able to see how human beings at the beginning of the kalpa, their greed and their ignorance, such as also some of the processing ignorance, some of the manifested ignorance, such as aggression, jealousy, and anger, would create such great harm to themselves. Anyhow, at that time, all of their provisions and the wish-fulfilling tree disappeared. The tree's root completely got cut off, and the tree disappeared. There's no more of the wish-fulfilling tree. On top of that, the merits and their lifespan also decreased. When we look at this, indeed, it's very different than the evolution theory, isn't it? It is not that we were evolved from an ape. It's not ape to man theory. It's rather from the celestial being to the coarse human beings. After another 500 years, the merits and lifespan continue to decline. And in this world, formed great rain. On the land or the places that doesn't have land, it started to curd up some kind of a skin of nutrition, just like we call it as a skin of milk when you boil it. So there's the skin of some kind of nutrition. According to Agama Sutra, it says that it is the nutrition of earth. In the middle Agama Sutra, it is called the flavor of earth. In the Abhidharma, it is called the flavor of earth as well. Anyhow, at that time, on top of the ground, there formed a layer of almost like pancake on top of the ground, but that's similar to honey. So it tastes really good. It's very flavorful. The people at that time, they would use the finger to take it out and then slowly to eat it. I remember when I was little, my parents would herd the yaks. I would boil some milk. Usually I would eat the skin of the milk. I would take little by little, and eventually I would eat a large whole out of that boiled milk. But my mother didn't say much about it. At the beginning, I was very much afraid to be caught red-handed, but my mother didn't really say much about it. Since my mother didn't say anything about it, I kept on testing the boundaries by eating a little more at a time. I remember that there was a time of boiling. I remember at that time we had to boil some milk to make tea. So I kept on getting little by little and more of those skin of milk because it was really delicious. And then later I ate quite a bit more. And my mother finally found out, but she didn't beat me for it. So the human beings at that time, at the beginning of the kalpa, enjoyed this this earth pancake, since it is really delicious. At the beginning, they would eat it finger by finger, and then later hand by hand, and then later one fist by one fist. So while eating that more and more, their body started to get more and more heavy. With eating those kinds of earth pancakes, the light of their body slowly disappeared as well. So their body started to get more and more heavy, and because of their greed, the merits of the human being started to disappear as well. It is quite important for all of our lay practitioners and the monastics to remember having a great desire would put you in the state of suffering. Because human beings at the beginning couldn't get contented with whatever they have. At the beginning, they would taste a little bit and then eventually eating more and more out of greed. After that, people started to make clothing out of different vegetation, such as cotton. Also, the contact got more coarse. They would be sufficed with gazing at each other through a smile. And then slowly and slowly, the desire got even more coarse. That is the process, progression, or retrogression of human beings.
这个是这么一个过程啊，就是然后就开始现在就开始吃东西了，就吃东西有很多。
After eating food, slowly the merits declined. And then over here it says that the light started to dissipate, and the ignorance generated darkness. Out of the collective karma, the sun and moon and the stars started to manifest. At that time, there is the day and night as well as the time and the seasons. Because the human being started to eat meals, one bite after another started to eat this kind of segmented meals. The body got hardened or got more solid. There's a solidifying of the body which weighted people down. I remember that there was a story, a bhikshu from the sutra story, since the Buddha said that it would be the best not to eat meal after midday. But this bhikshu said, no, I have to eat it. And then Buddha started to scold him by saying that at the beginning of human beings, it was you who started to eat first. And that is why you carried this karma to still wanting to eat food after midday meal. Over here it says that because a person enjoys eating food, out of this reason, the merits of human beings at that time slowly declined. All kinds of afflictions started to appear. Also, lights that human beings used to have, the aura started to disappear as well, to decline and eventually disappear. And then there's darkness in the world. After the darkness comes into this world, according to the natural law, then the human beings, since can't live in the darkness, out of collective karma, they're manifested sun and moon and then stars. So after the sun and the moon started to rise in the space, people at that time were very happy because they thought that was the light of the celestial beings. And then they would call it as the sun disk. After the sun set and the darkness started to appear again, there appeared the moon in the sky. Since the human beings at that time thought that was the moon was the companion of the sun, therefore in Tibetan we call the moon Dawa, because Dawa means companion.
最后的话呢，就是这个月亮呢一段时间就是没有出现，又没有出现
But the human beings at that time felt that the moon is very cooling, and the sun is warming, and then the human beings felt it was too cold at night and wishing the moon would not appear. So for a period of time, the moon did not appear. But after half a month, it appeared again because human beings felt that it was too dark in the night. Maybe it's just a folklore, maybe it's just a way to express how the human's aspiration could be very powerful. That is why there is the waxing and waning of the moon. According to Abhidharma, it says that one surface of the moon is made of crystal and the other one is made of lapis lazuli. When the crystal side is facing us, then we would be able to see the moon, and when the lapis lazuli side of the moon is facing the earth, we won't be able to see it anymore. That is another explanation of it. Anyhow, out of the collective karma of human beings, the sun and moon appeared, and then that resulted in the dividing of the day and night, and then the winter and the summer, and the morning and afternoon, and all of those concepts of time started to manifest. After living like that for a period of time, after the human beings ate more and more, which resulted in the decrease of their appearances and the lessening of their merits, also the increase of all kinds of afflictions such as greed and desire and arrogance, the human beings started to eat other things. At the beginning, prior to that, people were eating this earth pancake, but after a period of time, the earth pancake also disappeared. People felt that it was really, really sad because they lost that food. So after that period of time, there came the earth nutrition. After the earth nutrition manifested Gadambuga, which is natural garden. After a period of time, that natural garden also disappeared. There then manifested the natural crops. According to different sutras, especially in the Agana Sutra, it says that at the beginning it was the flavor of ground and earth flavor, and then there's the earth skin, and then there is the forest and vines, and then there's the rice. In the Agana Sutra and the Vinaya Sutra, they're described as something very similar. For example, it says that first it's the flavor of the earth, and then the pancake of the earth, and then there's the forest and vines, and then there's the fragrant crops or fragrant rice. After enjoying it for a period of time, let's finish this part and then we would conclude our class today. It says that because of the coarse food, there is the excretory system that's formed. Also, the male and female reproduction parts all manifest, which then lead to coarse touches such as hugging and sexual intercourse, as well as the beginning of desire and grasping. Because of knowing the limit, the beings started to build houses. Before this, that is called the kalpa with perfections. Because of the coarse food and people started to get stronger, and then people started to manifest, or people started to grow all the excretory system, also the female and male parts, because before that it was just the shape, a vague shape. But now at that time, the coarse shape started to manifest. And since people started feeling that they need to hide those parts, the clothings were there to hide it. On top of that, since there there are coarse touches and sexual intercourse. So out of greed, people's human birth out of womb started at that time. Since there's the impure actions, and to avoid greed and avoid jealousy, people started to build houses out of wood and out of rocks. But at the beginning of it, the source of the houses were rather built for having sexual intercourse. That is called, in fact, the origin of houses should really be called the houses or the homes of knowing one's limit, or the homes of knowing what is shameful. Also, at the beginning, there were no roofs on top of the roofs, but maybe because of the rain and because of to shelter oneself from those kinds of natural incidents, then people started putting roof on top of houses, and those were made of grass. For practitioners, we still call those houses as the grass houses, which is kind of similar to maybe at the beginning of the human houses. In the previous times, the natural crops would grow back again after harvesting them. And in order to reap other people's harvest, and people also try to harm each other, though those kinds of actions were not as coarse as what we have now. They were not as coarse as the 10 devious acts. It was simply the sexual intercourse or sexual activities that started back then. At the time of the perfect kalpa, if one were to practice, when at the time people practice the 10 virtuous deeds, we call it the perfect kalpa. So at that time, if one were to chant the Vajrasattva mantra, you just need to chant 100,000. But at the end, at the degenerated kalpa, then you need to chant for 400,000. Have you finished chanting it? There's just a few days left. I said that if you can't finish it, you need to avoid sleep and try to finish it. How many of you have finished chanting the 400,000s of Vajrasattva vow? Wow, 95.37 of you have finished. Okay, let's stop here today.